Each month in 2021 will be focused on the theme of connecting the disconnects, connecting teams virtually. For January, we were pleased to explore the new Scrum Guide and how it may be affecting teams and connecting teams together with Nevada Westburg and Lorie Cricket-Gordon.
One question I had that I actually forgot to ask already is kind of understanding like where your guys' background is this, knowing that we have lots of different roles coming to the table. If you guys wouldn't mind chiming into chat, go ahead and reply to everybody, but then, just let everybody know kind of like what role you're coming from, what role you're currently serving. And then we'll have an idea of the demographic and maybe ideas that might help us guide our conversation. Okay, with that, Nevada, you can continue. Everybody will chime in as we go there. So,
maybe
yeah, lots of different roles. Awesome. That's what I expected. I didn't expect everyone to be a Scrum Master. So that was kind of my joy in talking through this. Is not everyone necessarily is going to take the time to go through the guide line by line, and so because it does take time to not just to read it, but to really understand it. And to understand it, you have to see what the last one looked like to know what the comparison is. And the little slight niches, the variances in words really stood out to me this time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we spent also a lot of time watching the launch party via Zoom, and there was a lot of great commentary from Jeff and everybody. Some of the things that came across to us are that it's less prescriptive and more concise. Like this, they really took out a lot of language that was really specific and prescriptive. And one of the things that they really called out was that they have made this suitable for every department and domain. Like it's something that it no longer has software specific language.
I am so sorry. You're on a great roll there. I forgot, Neil reminded me, we have some people that really wanted to attend, but due to the inauguration ceremonies, some people weren't able to make tonight, and as well as maybe other reasons, but would it be okay with everyone if we did a recording of the session so those that wanted to hear what we have to share can get fed back? Awesome. Great. All right, thank you. Yes, please, Neil. And Nevada, go for it. I'm so sorry.
I think there's been more than enough of me talking right off the bat, but I thought we would give just a moment for people to kind of read through the high level themes. We've broken this document into 3 or 4 sections. So there's themes, there's a from to terminology, there are things that were specifically removed, and then there are places that there were additions. But I thought we would just kind of go section by section and talk about some of those things that are speaking out to us. So right off the bat, I'm sort of curious, like what's important to people in Scrum, and what are things that that stand out as you're reading through?
I added mine to chat. If you don't want to speak up loud, you can feel free to put it in chat, but go either way is encouraged. So like I said in chat, transparency is really important for me. That's a big thing, is not keeping things hidden and uncovered, but getting them out in the opening and dealing with them.
Absolutely. One of the things, yeah. One of the things I noticed that visibility came up, and they mentioned something about, I think it's further down in the document, but transparency was visibility plus understanding. They kind of went that step to clarify that just being visible isn't enough. Like it has to be something that can be readily consumed by stakeholders and people that need to know.
There's a really good point about the adaptability coming up in one of the sections that really stood out to me. As you guys are looking at the document in front of you, what surprises you? Is there anything that you see there that you wouldn't have expected? Are you not quite sure how to interpret with the new wording?
Pardon. I just finished reading the list, and it's kind of hard to keep up with the questions that are being asked simultaneously with reading. So
Yeah,
I can say that one of the things I glommed onto quickly was the more clarity on Scrum Master accountability, because in this chaotic multitasking world, I have many hats, and it's nice to have reinforcement on what does it look like for me to be accountable in my Scrum Master role, and have additional reinforcement, not to like show to somebody else, but to remind myself.
Absolutely. I love that idea of having something for yourself to be able to anchor on for accountabilities. And I saw another comment in chat about congruency with Agile principles and values, and being able to explain the connection between how we work and why, which is a really super good call out. They spent a lot more time leading with why in this iteration, where previously it was, do this thing. Now they've really led into the purpose of this thing is X, and they would really talk about the value, and they've just completely stripped away specifically how to do that thing.
Yeah, I definitely feel like it's less prescriptive. It's amazing how they can simplify it, but also make it more open at the same time.
So I think that the one team notion is a really significant change. So having been training teams and in the last 5 years executives as well in Scrum, explaining, I found myself using, there's team of the small t and team of the capital T, and the team of the capital T includes the Scrum Master and the product. I mean, you have to go through all this stuff to try to explain the fact that when somebody refers to team, it's hard to know which team they were referring to. And so if this really gets it down to one team, that's really great.
Absolutely. I loved that intentional shift in language. Just a quick process check. Is anyone having trouble hearing me? Am I coming across poorly?
Yeah, it's not great.
Okay. I will try to update my audio situation.
Thanks.
No worries. Yeah, it's not like there's an echo or anything. It just sounds like maybe you're in a box, if that helps. Okay, let's see. Congruency with Agile principles and values, being able to explain connection between how we work, Scrum. Although we just did that part, sorry. Got back on there. Let's see. So I think we talked about the things that really stood out to us, the things that we liked. Was there anything in this section that really surprised you, though? I love the product goal. I didn't see that one coming, but I see the value.
How did they describe their product goal?
The product goal is more of a high-level vision. So if you were to describe a roadmap in short, concise words, what would the product goal be? They didn't elaborate that far with it.
Although as I read it, it kind of smells like a value stream definition. I don't know if that resonates with anyone else.
That's a good way to think about it.
Okay.
I think so often in our Scrum teams, we miss giving that direction, right? So some of the most high-performing teams have a really concise vision for the direction they're headed. And having a Scrum goal is helpful for 2 weeks, but it doesn't carry you from sprint to sprint to sprint. And the product goal is that glue that helps you understand that long-term longevity, even beyond the next release. It could be like, here's an MVP and here's the next piece and here's the next piece. A product goal could be much larger than just the MVP of the thing that you're after at the moment.
When I glanced at the Scrum Guide, I interpreted a product goal as more along the lines of an epic. and so then it seems like a smaller chunk than something like a value stream or even an MVP. But did others, I maybe just missed the language or or the emphasis? So I saw it as something much smaller, bigger than a story, but sort of like that next increment up, not something big and grandiose.
Yeah, that was my question, is how is it different from an epic goal or an epic?
The word epic doesn't appear in the Scrum guide, so that's why I was thinking, oh, maybe that's sort of what they were talking
Yeah.
about.
I tend to think of epics as features
Yeah.
broken down into stories and a product goal. As I think of a product goal as being something greater than that, it's sort of a mission for the product that for a long time people have gotten. There was an emphasis on story mapping as a way to put the product back in the story, puts the product story back in the product, because the backlog itself oftentimes is a mix and match of bang for the buck, which it should be, but it doesn't tell the product story.
Yeah, it speaks bigger than an epic to me. Also, when I said value stream a minute ago, you might almost think it like vision combined with some execution detail, and perhaps the value stream does map to the quote is, a product is a vehicle to deliver value, right? So it's very inspecific about the containers that you decompose that into to actually deliver something. So it seems very much higher level to me than an epic.
I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into this, so I did a quick search on it. So looking at the bottom of page 7, and let me drop into chat some useful links for you. There's some chats, but if you go into the full version, on page 7, no, I'm in the PDF. I clicked into the PDF version. It says sprints enable predictability by ensuring inspection of adaptation of progress toward a sprint goal. Here's the important part: at least every calendar month. So what I'm hearing there, I mean, I know that we're looking at doing retros at least every month, but also that whole adaptation part of progress towards a product goal. If that's only monthly, that might be bigger than an epic to me. So, I think part of it depends on how you define an epic at your work. For an epic for my company, that's expected to be like a quarter. And then we have initiatives or features that are above that. And so part of it depends on your definition of epic. They might intend, the reason they leave epic out, they also don't have the word. Oops. Did you try again? Oops, sorry, my watch is talking to me. The word agile doesn't appear in the guide either. It's kind of interesting how they intentionally leave certain words out. And I like that because it leaves it open for interpretation.
That was something I had never realized before our exercise this time. Am I sounding a little bit better, or is it still?
That's
okay,
an improvement. Good. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Awesome.
It also looks like the word story is not in the Scrum guide. So we need either story nor epic.
Right.
Here.
I wonder if they have deliberately left that incomplete. They did say that the guide was purposely left incomplete, only describing like the most bare necessity to implement Scrum.
Yeah, he's referring to a comment made during the launch event, which if you haven't watched the launch event, the last hour of it is incredibly packed with useful information to understand how the guide was meant to be interpreted. It doesn't clarify everything, but I took a ton of notes just off that part as well.
Yeah.
All right, sounds like we're ready to move to the next section there, Nevada.
All right. There's a lot here. I'm just gonna be silent for a little while.
So are these changes resonating with everyone?
I find the change from a servant leader, which is a thing, to a true leader. Was there a copyright problem or something, right? And it's like, oh darn, what does a true leader mean? So that to me makes things a little bit more. It's like where do I start? And if I'm explaining it to someone, um, I can say, yep, servant leadership is a thing. It's probably, I'm sure it's got a Wikipedia page. You can start there. You can talk about other kinds of, transformational leaders, but true leader,
I'm with you on that one, David.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's books on servant leadership that's very well
Right.
documented, what that's all about and how it transpired. But true leadership, I don't know, it's a little bit squishy. But that's kind of the intention, I think, sometimes with this guide is that it is loose so that you can define it how you want to.
Right.
It seems interesting too to pair that with the switch from ensuring and finding to helping and coaching, so that you've taken it away in one place and put it in another.
That's a good call out.
That's a really good call out. Yeah.
Then we've got the true leader who serves the Scrum team and the larger organization. So we've got that notion of serving in there. I'm not sure why they were allergic to servant leader.
I think for some organizations, it felt a little bit stifling to the Scrum Master role, and this is something I picked up out of the launch. Is often a Scrum Master is coaching Scrum best practices, not just to the team, but up into the organization, and the guide has been modified to reflect that extension better. That you're not just serving, at that lower level, you're serving across the organization.
Is it possible making that change in order to throw more authority to the Scrum Master?
I interpreted it that way.
Similar to the difference where it says ensuring, finding to helping coaching. A coach has more authority as well.
It did seem like there were some themes that were around sort of elevating the accountability of the Scrum Master on the Scrum team. All of those switches to responsible to accountable had a really similar kind of feel to them.
Yeah, and with that, I was going to say they took the word role out and changed it with accountabilities as well, not just to the Scrum Master, but to everyone. Neil, was that you?
Yeah, that was me. I was going to say, I think it's interesting that they changed the wording of the removing impediments to causing the removal of impediments. Because you're not always the person who's removing them, but you are taking action to cause them to be removed. That's always the way I have interpreted it as the role, but it's interesting that they did reflect that in the language there.
But that's what I was just thinking about too, Neil. And also I think it really emphasizes that role of authority too, right? Because removing impediments, that almost sounds like grunt work, right? Like you're just running around trying to remove anything that's hurting people or blocking people. Whereas helping and coaching, right? When you're the coach, you're not actually playing the game necessarily, but you're getting people there. So I think that's a really interesting distinction.
So accountable for establishing Scrum and accountable for the team's effectiveness and true leader. So there are a few things here. So those of you who are Scrum Masters, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about these changes? Will it help? Will they help?
It's interesting to me just because I work in an organization where we have roles, but we are assigned accountabilities. And so everything is tied to an accountability that you own. So it's sort of like the language just happens to be moving towards what it's like a holacracy approach. So it's starting to converge here with the language change. And it is very much like I'm accountable for this. So I don't have to be the one to do it, but I have to make sure it gets done. So I like that language, but I'm also sort of in it every day.
I'm curious about it because the way that I've thought of my role as a Scrum Master and an Agile coach is to help empower the team. I'm interested in figuring out how they can themselves cultivate accountability to each other and to the goals that they have set for themselves and the processes that they are inventing and adapting and changing for the needs of the team and the product. So I find that strange to single out any single individual to be accountable for the team's effectiveness. I feel like that is the team's accountability.
I was curious if that was going to come out this evening from someone, because I have a similar kind of, I don't know, misgiving or just curiosity about what that means. Did anyone else take that meaning away from it, or does that resonate with anyone?
My issue with accountability is just in my own work. If you don't have someone that you can point at and say this one person has some accountability for the team, then it's hard to say. It's hard to hold an entire team accountable for an entire team's performance. Now, realistically, that's what we should do, right? But the practicality of it actually working is, it seems like it's better to have one person that ultimately is accountable.
Well, I mean, with the Scrum Master should be thought of as the team coach. And as the team coach, the Scrum Master is responsible or should be responsible for that overall effectiveness and being able to train and provide additional help where training, individual coaching, team coaching, whatever is needed to help up their skill set and help them become more effective. Someone in the role of an Agile coach or Scrum Master does typically have more experience. They should be able to look at the team and understand where are they weak and what can be improved, come up with a plan to work with that team to improve that. So yes, the Scrum Master does have accountability to help the team become more effective.
Yeah, and the sentence immediately following that sentence is exactly what Ruth was saying. They do this by enabling the Scrum team to improve its practices within the Scrum framework.
I thought what they're trying to do, I remember back to November, whenever they released the new guide, I watched the video, and they're trying to emphasize that the Scrum Master is more responsible for helping the team become more effective, while separating it from the product owner, which would be more help more in getting down the line of progress on the project, you know. So I think that's what they're trying to say, is the Scrum Master is not responsible for pushing the development of the project exactly, but to improve the team. So I'm agreeing with what Ruth said also, but I mean, the difference was the product owner is the one that's responsible for the project, or going in the right direction, I guess is the word.
But I mean, their definition now of that team does include the developers, the product owner, the Scrum Master. So the product owner needs to be improved as well. They need to be effective. So that's yet another coaching area for the Scrum Master to focus on, is understanding, is the product owner effective? If they're not, how could they help? And they do act as a team coach to up that skill set for the team members that are doing development, as well as the product owner who is managing the backlog.
And I can't remember, but I think part of the reason they tweaked this was they wanted to address where the Scrum Master isn't dedicated to one team, but might be jumping between multiple teams.
Which makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So I'm looking, so bottom of page 6, top of page 7, it really breaks down Scrum Master accountabilities in a way that I haven't seen before in the guide, which I love. And speaks on to Ruth's point about there are several responsibilities of areas to coach, not just, to the team. But it talks about serving the team, serving the product owner, and serving the organization. So it's got it broke down into 3 sections, which I really like. The one thing I don't like about this line, accountable for the team's effectiveness, is it sounds like a little bit of something that could get weaponized into a metric. Outside of that, I like the statement very much. I do believe that is the purpose of a Scrum Master, but without the right tools and support and a team that is buying in, like let's say I have a team that just doesn't want to do Agile, right? That there are challenges there as well. So do you hold that against the Scrum Master if it's an unwilling participant or they don't have the support? So that I worry about that turning into a metric somewhere, but time will tell.
I think for me, what makes me concerned is that part of coaching is empowerment, and that you enable the person to see the influence that they have on their own experience, their own growth, their own relationships with their team members, and you sort of move between coaching and celebrating and all of the things that are psychologically going to help the team also be in the growth space, right? And if there's language out there that's saying, oh, but ultimately that's you, that's the Scrum Master, it shifts things in a way linguistically. It creates a tone that I feel uncomfortable with. So it's not that I'm objecting to any of the things that anyone is saying. I just think that that particular phrasing moves away from the kind of empowerment that I want to create for my teams.
Well, it does take me down to the self-managing, and I don't want to jump ahead if people aren't ready yet, but it does, going back to your point about helping teams becoming self-managing, and that that's that is the ultimate goal of a Scrum Master, is that the team can run themselves. And how do we get there? And so these are the baby steps to get to that spot.
Well, and I wonder if that really speaks to what the honest intent of Scrum and the role of the Scrum Master is to get them to that next step and perhaps not much more, right? And we talk about, as Clay was alluding to, that there's sort of a different mindset, a different level, a different set of skills and terminology you use when you're that experienced Agile coach, when you're working with a team that has, gotten through all of the Scrum stuff. They know how to organize their work. They know, they've developed the technical practices so they can go faster, and then they're ready for something bigger. When I think of Scrum, I think of it as sort of the working person's Agile framework. Great place to start because it's fairly prescriptive, but yet still consistent enough. And maybe that's where it's supposed to be. And maybe that's where it can have the most impact. I wouldn't expect them to acknowledge it, but I know that I acknowledge that this is a good place to start, but it's probably not where you end up because, I've seen lots of teams and organizations outgrow it.
I think one of the hardest parts on that note is the outgrowing it thing. So many teams scale, and that wasn't originally factored into some of the Scrum concepts. They were meant to be more for smaller teams. Did I freeze there? Looked like I froze for a second. Sorry for that. How do you guys feel about that term, self-managing versus self-organizing? I'll be honest, Nevada and we had to Google the difference. They're so interused between each other, but they really do mean different things.
It's a big difference.
It's
What,
challenging and threatening to managers.
what did you learn when you Googled that?
What was that last?
What did you guys learn when you were
Hmm.
studying when you're studying up on the meanings of these keywords?
Yeah, well, at least at the very first cursory Googling, I found the Hackman chart that sort of shows the stair-stepping set of responsibilities that teams have versus manager-led teams. And one of the things that I noticed is that self-designing is sometimes replaced with self-organizing. So when they changed the language to self-managing, at first I almost thought that implied a shift backward toward the manager-led spectrum. But then as I continued looking more and more at it, it started to feel more that self-organizing was a less defined term at the moment that it was used in the original Scrum guide, and that maybe self-management just had a little bit more of a universal understanding around it. And so that shifting to that was actually a step in more toward the self-organizing or self-managing way of being. That was, of course, just my take on it.
Yeah, I think from my experience, it's difficult to sometimes self-organize. If I just think about from just saying organizations and being able to pick and choose from different organizations and create a team, right? That's a little bit of the dream team when it comes to an Agile Scrum team, but it's really hard to do that because sometimes those are HR decisions or those are above our pay grade in terms of just at the team level. So from my side, hearing that they want to go self-manage the team speaks a little bit to like, hey, we're going to manage and how we practice it, at least do well with what we got. That's at least from what I hear on my side, and just that evolution maybe, because I think that self-organization can be frustrating at times to say, but I can't grab everybody that I need on my team really to be successful.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion over does self-organizing mean that we decide, the individual contributors decide who's on which teams, and certainly that does happen in some organizations. I'm fond of Sandy Memoli's book on creating great teams and how to enable teams to self-organize, to decide who's on what teams. Also fond of the fast agile approach that incorporates that, but more Scrum teams than not are not self-organizing in that way, but they are self-managing. They're expected to. I like that self-managing goes more to shared leadership and figuring out how we do the work and how we work together.
I like how managing kind of redefines or could potentially redefine the role of the engineering manager. There's still a very necessary need for engineering managers, in the roles of, standardizations and discipline, HR management, technical expertise. There's lots of uses there, sometimes bleeding in with a principal role. But I like that this really points out like, hey, no, the team can do it. They don't need a manager in the day-to-day meetings. That manager can be free to go do the connections that they need to do, to get us to where we want to go technically. I think it could be interpreted differently, but that's how I would like it to be interpreted, because too often I see teams get stifled, not be able to own the sprint.
I'm fond of the Spotify model in part for the fact that managers don't run squads. Managers lead people of similar skill sets and are responsible for making sure that those people get their careers supported. And I think that's a much healthier way of thinking about software development management.
Jim, you made a comment in chat. I was wondering if you could come on mic and maybe amplify that, because I really like where you're going with that comment.
Oh, okay. Hello. So there was Jeff and Moss made a couple of comments and I was responding to that because I think that in terms of the dynamics between, you know, a master and a servant, or all the, you know, a master and team, is that there's a certain like perception by the group of who's in charge and who's not. So you're defining hierarchy. So when you change the term to management from organizing, it becomes more a personal item. It and maybe can be it becomes that person's, each team member's responsibility to take care of whatever, you know, component they've been assigned or they feel responsible in doing. So that's my point of personal responsibility. It's kind of, you know, what part do I play in this team, and what do I have to accomplish in order to get us to the next point?
Yeah, and I find it interesting.
So,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead. It's fine.
Oh, I was going to say, and I was just, searching through the document because they use the word accountable and accountability all over the place. And we've talked this a lot at like our Scrum Master community practice and things like that, where it's like that's a tough word, and to really then engender that feeling of self accountability, of team accountability, of accountability within the role, we just don't have a lot of models, and or a lot of people sort of naturally will put themselves out there, because I mean that's a risky thing to say, yep, I'm going to do this, or hey everybody, we're going to do this together, especially when there are managers where it's a lot easier for someone on the team or someone outside of the team to say, you manager, go do this.
Yeah, I think that's part of the dynamic that they might be trying to focus on by making that change. It seems like there's some concept of delegate authority or delegate responsibility. So that might be what your Scrum Master is assigned to do. You delegate the responsibility, and then it's up to the team member to be accountable for that responsibility. And then it's the Scrum Master's accountability to the product owner for the team to speak for the team and act as that negotiator in terms of the product goal, which is I want, you know, the owner is saying, I want to go from here to here. And the Scrum Master is saying, okay, we can get there. And this is how we're going to do it. I'm going to delegate responsibilities to the team. And then I'm going to come back around and I'm going to ask the team what they've accomplished. And that's going to define each person then can take home a certain level of ownership in the end result. And they can then define their own personal responsibility in it. So instead of, and the concept of micromanaging could come up, but that's based upon the person, the Scrum Master's personality itself. If they feel if they feel like they have to, watch everybody and check in with them and all that, that's one level. But at the other side, you say, okay, I trust my team and I give them the opportunity to fail, which empowers them to be personally responsible and show their success by accomplishing a task or not. And then that's that learnable, that's that teachable moment where you can improve that person by defining, well, let's look at, how you failed and what can we do next time to make it better? If you're still floating, that kind of thing.
I wanted to kind of throw in a little curveball. I finally put my finger on why I'm like interested in this phrasing, self-managing, because it occurs to me that it's like a psychology term. Self-management, self-regulation. It's about how well you can manage your emotions in difficult and trying situations. And so that gives it a different kind of tone to me that probably is not intended. And I'm curious about that, the way that might give us another nuance that could be super useful and not in that hierarchical, like, am I a manager? Am I a senior manager? Am I a director? What accountability does that give me? But I'm a human being and I have lots of humanness that I have to manage, which I think is a far more interesting question.
Wow, what a great point, Kelly. I just grabbed the definition of self-management from the Oxford dictionaries, and you hit a nail on the head there. I didn't think of it that way before, but yeah, I kind of also was tuning on Jeff's comment before that, which was, what is the difference between accountability and blame? That's also an interesting Google search. But yeah, wow. I mean, both, I could go either direction on this one.
Kelly and oh, sorry.
Oh, no, please, Kevin.
Oh, sorry, Lorie. Yeah, I think it's really interesting because like we all have, you know, we are all human beings and we have to self-manage. But I'm sure all of you, you know, have had, you know, a team that you've been on where maybe there's that person that is completely inherently incapable of self-managing, or hopefully you haven't. I was on a fairly small, I was in charge of a very small development team as a PM about 2 years ago. And there was unfortunately an individual on it who was a developer and was just not able to control his temper and just absolutely unable to self-regulate. And I think that like you said about self-management, is that's one of those things that, you know, we struggle with on a daily basis. But I think as an Agile team, we also have to think about how that may affect the rest of the team too, when there might be an individual there that's like completely, you know, not willing to self-manage, I guess, too. And I think that from my angle, it's like I always think of that too when I think of like self-management, along with, you know, the more literal definition, which thank you, Lorie, for finding.
Yeah, self-management, that's kind of what I touched on before when you have a team that's really not willing to dive into Agile ways. For teams that are resisting Scrum, for instance, or don't want to do stand-ups or don't believe in retros. And they're not even willing to listen to the why. How do you get past that? And maybe part of that is pointing out that there's self-management required.
And it's so frustrating too, yeah.
One question, suddenly I sort of remembered something from the release, and I was looking for my notes at the beginning of this meeting, so forgive me if I'm totally off the mark. But part of the reason they define it this way is to let people, give them more guidance in terms of the team doesn't have to be exactly the team. They can pull in experts as they need. Is that part, do you remember that, Lorie?
It's resonating with me.
So when they
recently again, is it picking up on you?
What's that?
I said I know Nevada's watched it twice and once just last week. Do you remember that part?
I'm having trouble recalling that part at this moment.
I just remember down there where it says internally decide who does what, when, and how. That part of the guidance was to, it doesn't have to be exactly that team. There's freedom for the team to pull in an expert, you know, to work on a portion of the product, you know, or the project. And I think that is part of the managing part.
Yeah, I didn't make a note on that part.
It does still definitely align with that theme of empowerment, and the team's overall, like the Scrum team is accountable for the delivery of value, however they need to get there.
Yeah, which goes back to the impediments. I always felt that was a bottleneck, removing impediments. I felt like, why am I in the middle of this? I'm just slowing it down. And the same thing with bringing other people in. If you need somebody else, ask them.
I see in chat, Ron said an Agile colleague, Dan Greening, pointed me to a book that might be helpful. I believe that we are not very far from the day when most professionals will be measured not on individual deliverables and output, but on how their teams perform and how well they are able to get their work done.
I think it goes back to Jim's comment of individual responsibility. Personal responsibility.
Yeah, people get hired because they're a good fit, but people don't get evaluated year to year if they're still a good fit.
It depends on the HR system.
Yeah, every system I've seen so far, there's no asking that. There might be a personal goal to improve your human nature, but for lack of better words. Yeah. Like I had, when I was early in my engineering days, I had listening as one of my skills. Just step back, let other people talk. You know, the same thing for how do you measure an individual on the right things?
Right.
Let's see. I want to make sure that we stay on track. We still have another big section coming up. Are you guys feeling comfortable to move on, or do you guys want to keep here for another moment?
I see a lot of nodding. No frantic shaking of heads. Yeah. Okay. Let's do it. Things that were removed. This is by no means an exhaustive list. They literally went from 19 pages to, what is it, 13 pages?
I think that's true.
Yeah.
Yep. I wrote it down, but then, yeah, 19 to 13. Is anybody in panic mode here?
Did they give any reason for removing the 3 questions? Yes. I agree with Jeff. I'm happy to see them go, but
I am thrilled to see them go. Yeah. So I think I actually added all of these bullet points are exactly what they were talking about. I might have added a couple, but the developers, the 3 questions were stifling. It wasn't getting to the point necessarily, and it was becoming more of a status report type meeting. And so the goal with removing those 3 questions was, let's figure out what the real purpose of us being here. And it's like, how do we move forward? Did I put in here already? We changed ours. So the example they gave, you might even use one question like, why isn't the first story done? The question I ask in my stand-ups is, what have we done to move progress forward on the sprint goal? And that's the question. We don't do the 3 questions. That is the question. And so we still talk about blockers. Those come up as part of it because it's also like, why aren't we moving forward? I think those things are naturally occurring as part of redefining, but they did put the ownership of how stand-up should be run in the developer. That one kind of surprised me. Developers can select whatever structure and techniques they want.
As long as.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the 3 questions are just to drive devolvement into, oh, let's do stand-ups on Slack.
Yep. Have you guys ever had the problem where you're in a stand-up and everyone's so focused on what they did that the sprint goal itself isn't really moving forward?
All the time.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
And so
every story's in progress.
Yeah. So that was another point they pointed out in the release was it's supposed to realign everybody on a daily basis.
Let's see. Removing the guide. Oh, go ahead.
One of the bullet points that you have there in the middle is prevents a status report. Can you share more about your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I definitely have thoughts, but I think I'll see if anybody else has one before I answer.
Sorry, what was the question?
In the middle of the bullets, there's a bullet that says prevents a status report under the remove 3 questions for standard.
Can you highlight that one, Nevada?
I know that in my team, they, especially early on, had a tendency to really focus on the numbers, the countable data that was presented in the stand-up, or like if I showed them the burn down chart as it looked, they would get really, really focused in on that and what it was saying about them and what about their work. I'm like, no, I need you to back away from analyzing and just use this as a mirror to reflect what it is, how work is, like ask why this looks this way, not don't focus in on that. And that sort of, that initial analytical of the numbers and critical of self based on those numbers makes me think of the mechanic nature of a status report versus a human working process where we're able to proceed better informed and aware of ourselves.
So we're all using the term stand up, and I just did a search through the Scrum guide, and the word stand up does not appear in the Scrum guide. They're daily scrums in the Scrum guide, and I think that's significant for the fact that my initial take on Scrum was that, you know, that group of people around the ball in rugby. But when I actually looked at the definition is Scrum is a way of restarting the game. And if we use the daily Scrum as a replanning session, we're restarting our game every day, as opposed to oh, this is what I'm doing. It gets more into the, you know, how do we do that as a team? How do we restart our game?
Yes, all of us have that definition of stand-up in our head. So I'm wondering if like a really early guide had stand-ups in it. Because I had an engineering manager who would thump it into us that no, stand-up means stand up. You don't want to get comfortable. You don't want it to take too long. And if you're uncomfortable, then Scrum's taking too long.
Yeah, where did that come from?
I'm not sure. I would have to go back a ways, I think. Neil, I want to circle back to your question for me on the status report. So I had the advantage of going through Adam Weisbart's Scrum training in 2017, I think, 2018. But a ways back after I'd been doing Scrum for 10 years, it was, first of all, really surprising to see how much the guide changed. So so thank you guys for coming today and kind of hearing some of those changes. But this was one of the areas that he really focused on. He works really hard around making daily stand-ups useful. And so one of the things he was teaching us was, you know, find different ways to shake up your stand-up. You know, don't be the one they look to. It becomes a status report when they're looking at you. Even one of his making stand-ups better, daily scrums better, he would be like, okay, so the Scrum Master, once everybody starts, or before everybody starts, is go hide behind somebody and see how long it takes them to start the meeting. Like, don't let them talk to you. Make them talk to each other. That's the point of the stand-up. The point of the stand-up is communication.
Lorie, what was his name?
Oh, Adam Weisbart.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's funny because it strikes me because I had a team where people would actually come with their 3x5 card with their handwritten notes of this is what I have to say this morning, and it was literally status report of what progress they made on whatever story they were working on, and there was almost no discussion whatsoever of the challenges they ran into or realignment of resources or things that they needed to do differently to adjust. It was all about just that here's what I did kind of report out, which I never found useful.
I think there are 2 reasons that people like to do that. Is one, it's in the past, so they totally 100% know what they did yesterday, or at least hopefully, you know, they've written that down. And 2, it's a chance to reiterate kind of their value. You know, here's what I did. I'm valuable.
Mm-hmm.
But the future thing, there's a lot of uncertainty, and but I guess that's the point of the Scrum meeting, is to help people get that uncertainty out there into the whole team and say, I'm not quite sure what I'm doing. So that's, I think, that's why the focus on the future instead of the past is better.
I like that, and there's I think that one of the things that daily Scrum stand up does is it gives you that daily opportunity to find the thing to coach on. I mean, I'm just thinking of an example this morning when one of those kind of impediments came up, and 4 team members jumped on it and were like, I can do that, I can help you, let's do this, let's do that. And I was so happy having that moment where I could say to them, that was beautiful. I love how you all worked together. You all owned that sprint goal, and you supported each other and the work. And so I also think of it as just that daily chance to see each other and remember each other and have that opportunity to influence.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm actually quite terrified because I'm going into a new team that I'm taking on, does their stand-ups completely virtually, like typed into Slack. I'm just like, wow, how do I help them with a culture of change in an environment like that? So I'm gonna run into some of that naysay challenges that we talked about earlier, because I want that, Kelly. That's what drives into a high performing team.
There might be more for us to talk about on the daily Scrum, but I'm kind of curious how sprint planning works. Because when I think of when I first started with Scrum, which is close to 20 years ago now, I think, is when I first read the Black Book. My takeaway was like, okay, you plan all the work for 3 weeks, and you have tasks for everybody, and everybody signs up during sprint planning, and it's a 2-day activity. And then as I got right, I mean, that's what I remember doing. I thought that's what I was supposed to be doing. I'm curious what the point of view is now on sort of the amount of time that you invest and the expected outcomes for sprint planning.
Great question.
And then how does that tie into the daily Scrum? Because maybe it's maybe originally there was a necessity of here's all the work, here all the cards are moving, but we're only planning 2 weeks at a time. This is great, but you're still planning every hour of every day.
Yeah, I'll just say no plan ever survived a battle.
Right.
I have a military background, so apologies if that sounds straight and harsh, but it's true. It doesn't. Every plan changes, even weddings and how you expect them to go off. And so when you're talking about all that, I'm just like, well, how do we swarm? How do we come together? How do we shift work? If someone owns the work, my experience in observation is that another engineer won't take it from them and get it done. But if no one owns the work, they'll pick it up. So I always struggle when a team wants to plan out.
Skimming over the sprint planning section, and it does seem to be much thinner than I remember it. So that's good.
Yeah, they definitely simplified it. It's much less prescriptive.
And there's a brand new first topic to sprint planning, which is the question, why is this sprint valuable? I thought that's just a really cool way to sort of anchor everyone into sprint planning.
Nevada, let's come back to the section if we have time, but you actually touched on something that's in the next section, and it's actually our largest section. We're at 633. So let's take a look at this list for a second, including the why is the sprint valuable, but along all the other points as well. So let's start with the why is the sprint valuable, since that was just brought up. How does that one stand out? What does that mean? I was just talking with another Scrum Master earlier today around value, because there's a team that does Kanban, refuses to point, estimate, and as a result, they don't get a lot of conversation about the challenges of working on it. I said, well, do you guys at least point in business value? He's like, no, I guess we just never thought of that. But the challenge the team's having is that they're not predictable. They're not hitting any dates. And so if you don't have something that's measurable for the team to work against and show progress, that can be challenging. So that kind of stands back to me as, why is the sprint valuable? And to me, that resonates back with business value, but I could be misinterpreting it.
I think you actually touched on it before, Lorie, especially where, like, what do we define as value, and is that definition of value, changing now? I forgot who mentioned it before, but like on an individual contributor basis versus like as a team basis. And I think it's really interesting because our value is delivering our receivables on time, on budget, and with the expected features. But what is that going to look like in the future too?
One of my sprints last month, I actually told the team not to take much work on, not to hit their normal velocity. Why is that valuable? It's still valuable, but there's a very good reason for it.
I would really love it if it was for a design sprint.
Holiday sprint, it was last month.
There we go.
This particular team had been driving very hard for 2 or 3 months, just sprint after sprint, no breaks, no time for innovation, no time for, well, we still made time for team building, but it wasn't enough. And it was like, hey, you did it. Let off the brakes for a minute. They do a great job, working a sustainable pace, but you can't have the same pace all the time. It's kind of like a diet. If you eat the same calories all the time, then eventually you stop losing weight, right? And the sustainable pace, I believe, has a certain piece to it as well, where it just becomes the norm, and engineers start to feel like they're a drone. So taking that time for innovation, taking that time for team building, those things are really important long term to the team, and the team gets more done long term if they're a better team. So that was the value in that sprint.
I really like that, Lorie, because sometimes when you're climbing a mountain, like the best part is getting to the top and taking look around at the view and seeing what you've accomplished, and then maybe setting your sights on the next mountain and then like, oh yeah, that's what I want to do next. But it's taking that time to just be like, okay, what have we done? Yeah, and just sit, meditate, and have a little introspection.
Great analogy.
Yeah, what's the point of climbing a mountain if you don't take time to view what's available to view from the summit?
What other pieces in the additions and clarifications are standing out?
I like the third question on the whys. Why adaptation? Except that I think that they're missing part of the reason for deviation. That deviation part there, it seems to me to be more leaning towards going away from the goal, as opposed to just adapting the moment it learns anything new through inspection. So it could be both ways, I guess, reading the second sentence, but the deviation just throws me off there with adaptation, because you don't always want to adapt just for a deviation reason, you may want to adapt because you found a better way to do something that you're trying to achieve.
I
a really
really
good call
like
out.
that, Neil. And I also think that deviating from what, right? I mean,
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
have to think through that problem. If you find out in your demo that your stakeholder is not happy with the direction you're going, that is great news. That is a happy day when you know, when you're not very far along into that process, that you need to move in a different direction. And so, and that is a deviation. You want that deviation, you want that change. So I'm a little confused by that too.
Yeah.
But I wonder if that sort of underscores the, there's still that word accountability. There's still the idea of committing to a time box, right? I mean, there's, they are, I think they're explicit that there are some, there are expectations, and they, this is what the team is supposed to be going for, is, delivering the increment, is working within the time box, which has always been part of Scrum. And while I think they've softened it quite a lot over the years, I think that's sort of core to the philosophy. Actually, let me go look to see if they call that out in the theory part. It says, an iterative incremental approach to optimize predictability and control risk. So, right, they're still saying those kind of words. And so then it kind of doesn't surprise me that, they think of deviation as a bad thing. But it's true, when we're dealing with complex systems, especially ones that involve people, surprises are a source of learning, and we should, leverage that in our adaptation.
Really good discussion. I wondered if somehow that tied in at all with now they've explicitly included lean thinking in what Scrum is about, and there's a lot to do with sort of the idea of minimizing deviations there.
When I first learned about Scrum in 2002, it was from a development manager who I'd worked with before, and I had not heard of Scrum yet in 2002, and I'd heard of extreme programming, but not Scrum. And so I said, "What is it?" And he said, "Well, developers get to go heads down for 2 weeks at a time and not be interrupted." And any of you who are developers know the value of focus and the value of not multitasking, the value of not deviating, basically. That focused goal, and of course 2 weeks is arbitrary. It depends on what our sprint length is. And in that case, it was 2 weeks. And of course, my immediate reaction was, having been both a developer and a product manager, well, what happens when our competition comes out with something, or our customers ask for something new, or and he said, "Oh, well, sprint boundary, we finish what we intended for that 2 weeks. It's a shippable increment of the product. We just come back to the backlog, and the backlog's been reordered to reflect that." And I thought, wow, that's the yin and yang of software development.
I think I have an open question there. Mas, I want to kind of jump over to what you're talking about, because this one stood out to me as well. Definition of done. It was just kind of lightly described or reflected in previous guides, where it's very clearly stated as one of the commitments this time.
Yeah, in the previous ones, it was always confusing to me, because it's like, well, is the definition of done changing every sprint or increment, or is it just something that we do during planning? And this makes it a little bit more clear that the definition done, it's it's whatever quality measures you need to be required for the product. And so it helps be, says quality is built into our process, not that we just define quality arbitrarily. I mean, even the done part in the previous ones, done was in quotes. So it's like, is it really done, or is it the word done? I don't know.
Also, they took out the quotes in this version.
Yeah, yeah. They're committing to say definition of done is a real thing. Previously, it wasn't really. I mean, the definition of done, whatever that meant. So I think by taking out words, they made it stronger.
Yeah, having it be a formal definition is a good thing.
They tied that as a commitment that to the increment, which sort of also made it pop. There's like the 3 commitments and the 3 artifacts.
I would say
Anyone
that.
notice? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. From my perspective on what Moss wrote up there, that I really like that they put required in that sentence, because that's definitely helps your stakeholders understand when you can say this is done, and then they go, well, I don't think it's done, and then you can come back at them and say, well, it meets the requirements that were laid out when we started. And that's pretty good, then if it's a measure of, well, the fit and finish isn't that good, that's your quality. And that's whether or not how you hold yourself as a developer when you look back on what you've done, and determine if you're proud or not, or if you just got it done because you were in a hurry and you had to get it. So yeah, I think there's a lot going on in that sentence, and I think it all fits really well. So yeah, good point, Moss.
Yeah, and it adds some safety for the development team, because you don't have a goalpost suddenly being moved, on Thursday before the end of the sprint. You know what you're working toward, and if they need to, further enhance what's going on, it's just you add it to the backlog.
So one thing I always thought with definition of done, I always thought it was at the team level, and we didn't point out here in this guide. That is something I'd probably add. The definition of done, if set as a standard for the organization, needs to be followed by all the teams. Focus on that increment. I think I'm really close to what it said. But if not an organizational standard, the team must create a definition of done appropriate for the product. So, for me, that resonates because an API may not be acceptable and they think it's done, but the app team doesn't. It would be nice to share that definition across multiple teams.
A good point. Is that new to this new guide, the sort of specifying that the definition of done?
I think it is. So on page 16, and it's hard because it's not really defined in the previous guide, so it's a little bit harder to find.
Right.
Let's see. Well, it appears 39 times in the previous guide, so it's going to take me a second.
In the previous guide, it's in quotes every time, or often.
Yeah.
Right.
But I'm looking to see, yeah, and does it ever define it though in the previous guide? Definition of done.
I think it's that description is what I pasted in there. It's kind of wishy-washy.
Yeah.
Everyone has
to. Oh,
that
was from the previous.
Yeah.
Back when done was in quotes.
Well, even further confusing, the last guide, it says a done increment is required at the sprint review. Only members of the development team create the increment. Well, if your done refers to the increment and only one team is responsible for the increment, then that puts it at the team level. But then the new guide refers to any team that's part of the increment. Kind of diving into the scalability.
I think you know, all of you who have trained teams in multiple environments have run across at some point the encouraging teams to create a definition of done, and then discovering that somebody in a large corporation has a definition of done. It applies to everyone, and it was created by some vice president somewhere. My encouragement to those teams is, great, take that one and then make it yours. Essentially make it like object-oriented programming, where you inherit that larger definition of done, but you can subclass it. You can add methods that are unique to your project, your part of the larger scheme. It occurred to me that team created definitions of done were possibly the most important practice in Agile. We could have lots of arguments about that, but I think it's one of the most. And I co-authored the study of product team performance, in which we query people all over the globe on what they do and how effective their teams are. And so we added that to, I don't know, our fourth study. We've had them 6 or 7. And what we discovered was that teams that do not have a definition of done correlate with the least productive teams. But just having a definition of done doesn't correlate with highest performance teams. Having a definition of done that the team was involved in creating correlates with the highest performance teams.
I really love the analogy of the object-oriented programming and giving the team the ability to sort of be empowered and make that theirs and to sort of build on it. It seems like you can still reap the benefits of having that team formed definition of done for how that will bode for their productivity.
And the organization need to have some common parts to their definition of done, which I can appreciate. But it will at least have this.
Right.
So I found the spot in the 2017 guide that most closely resonates with the rewording of this one. So I put the link in there if you want to look at the 2017 version. And 1, 2, 3, the 5th paragraph in on sprint retrospective. So you have to jump to sprint retrospective. And thank you for the tip to use quotes around done. It made a lot less instances. Here's what it said. It said, during each sprint retrospective, the Scrum team plans ways to increase product quality by improving work processes or adapting the definition of done, if appropriate and not in conflict with product or organizational standards. So to me, that was at the team level before, or now it's potentially opening it up to that new way of working.
Interesting.
Nevada, we've got 8 minutes left. Neil and Star, do you guys need any time at the end?
No, not really.
Okay, great. Let's jump to our last section. I think 2 pieces kind of combined together there, and then a couple of resources I can put in chat that follow this, but we'll focus here. I'll grab those and put the other things in chat.
The top one might be something that a lot of people already know. It was new to me to see that list of 4 things. And then one of my favorite quotes from J.J. Sutherland about, if you have 5 or more top priorities, the person deciding on your corporate strategy is the junior person on your company, because they get to choose what to work on, because you've said everything is important. I just love the way he says it.
What if you only have 4?
We got room for one more.
Yeah.
Okay, finally. All right, there's the first one of the follow-up stuff. If you guys want to grab that link for later, you'll find that helpful. It's not on topic to what we're at. It's just the very end of this document, a couple of links that might be interesting to you. Yeah, I liked on the 4 things that Scrum Masters need to know, it's beyond the Scrum Guide. Like this is just a piece of it. Fundamentals of lean principles, even more defined, that we have to have a better understanding of that as a Scrum Master from the guide and the way that they've crossed over. I anticipate the next guide might have even more lean ways of thinking into it. This might just be the start, like opening the thought gate in the ways that they overlap.
That's a really good guess. We heard it here first. We'll have to check back in a couple of years.
We'll see.
What are the 8 highly productive patterns? Is that in the link there?
No, I started to Google it. Honestly, it wasn't something I was familiar with. I've lost my Google search. I have to redo it, but Google it. And I went down a rabbit hole with it. So you're warned. There's quite a bit behind it.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's on my list to look up too.
Yeah, it's not 8 habits of highly productive people. It's different. Let me look up specific to Sutherland and see if there's a comment. It was Jeff Sutherland that made that comment, I believe, right? Yeah. Oh, I didn't spell his name right.
So these 4 things came up during the Scrum Guide launch.
Mm-hmm.
event.
Yeah, it was almost in the closing discussion. It was kind of like a before you go. So here's a Medium article by Sutherland. Well, it's not by Sutherland, but it's referred to him. And this one has 9 proven ways to make your Scrum team hyper productive. So I'm trying to find the
There's an extra one. That's great.
reference to Sutherland. But like I said, this is a rabbit hole that I have yet to understand, so I don't have a good answer.
So definitely something to look into as homework. It's always fun to have new things to explore.
Exactly. I don't know if the article I gave you is maybe the first rabbit hole you want. It's a pretty long one. But a good link to remind you tomorrow morning when you get back to your desk.
So the document you've been sharing, Lorie, in Nevada, is that, do we have a URL to that?
I think we're ready to share it. Nevada and I had talked about sharing it after this meeting. We didn't want anybody to get early copies, knowing that copies of copies things happen. I don't have any objections. Nevada, are we ready to make the link available as viewers to everyone? Okay.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I find it very helpful. I really appreciate the work that the 2 of you have put in on this.
Okay, let me change the link so anyone can be a viewer. There we go.
Oh, great. Thank you, Lorie.
Link and chat.
There's some resources here at the bottom as well, just as we were going through various additional videos in addition to the launch. One that came up was the 3 key points for Scrum Masters. And then the 5 Scrum values video is also super helpful. And then there's a link that will take you right to 12 minutes, 10 seconds where they summarize the values.
Yep. I put those links in the chat just in case we got to time.
Awesome.
And then Nevada and I agreed also to share our LinkedIn information. So if you want to ring, oh, that didn't work. Did it? I got yours, not mine. So if you guys want any further follow-up or have more suggestions, here you go. Well, thank you guys so much for coming together. It's been really fun to explore this deeply. I've never looked into a guide to this depth before, but as the new one came out, it seemed so significantly different to me. I started looking at it And Nevada and I were already meeting every other week to talk about different Scrum. But it started with Scrum coaching. We've talked about a lot of things, not just coaching. And then we thought, somebody asked if somebody was going to present the Scrum guide, and I said, well, we're pretty far along. We could drive a discussion. So you're not our guinea pigs. You're actually the second session we've run. But I really appreciate you guys sharing, because you guys brought up so many points that I didn't even think of before and didn't come up in our last session. So I think every time we have this discussion about what's changed in the guide, we'll learn new ways of interpretation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, all. This was super fun.